The Dragon Court ordered slave Omega Elowen Vale to sleep beside the frozen dragon heart beneath King Kael's icebound throne. By dawn, they expected the relic to freeze her weak blood and leave her body blue beneath the glass floor. By midnight, it would beat for the first time in centuries only when she cried. The ice chamber beneath Dravenhold had never known warmth. It lay far below the royal palace, beneath the throne room, beneath the dragon crypts, beneath even the old furnace tunnels where condemned servants whispered prayers before punishment. The walls were carved from blue-white ice so clear that trapped shadows could be seen inside them, like creatures sealed behind frozen glass. Silver chains hung from the ceiling. Frost covered the black stone floor in thin, glittering veins. At the center of the chamber, suspended inside a pillar of ancient ice, was the frozen dragon heart. It was larger than a war drum. Krystalline, silent. Every child in Dravenhold knew the warning. Royal flame ruled above, but royal ice judged below. The frozen dragon heart was said to have belonged to the first Dragon Queen, a relic so cold it killed unworthy blood without leaving a wound. The court sent traitors near it, failed brides, disobedient servants, weak-blooded prisoners whose deaths could be called purification instead of murder. Tonight, they sent Elowen. She stood barefoot at the edge of the frost circle in a thin slave shift, her wrists bruised from iron cuffs, recently removed only because metal froze too quickly in the chamber. Her dark hair clung damply to her cheeks. Her skin had already begun to pale from the cold. Around her throat sat the black omega collar of the lower palace, marked with one word no one ever needed to say aloud. Owned, not by a person, by the court. A slave omega in Dravenhold did not belong to herself. She scrubbed ash from dragon holes, carried coal to royal braziers, washed blood from trial floors, and lowered her eyes when nobles passed. If she cried, she was called soft. If she endured, she was called empty. If she spoke, she was reminded that weak blood survived by silence. Elowen had learned silence well, but tonight, even silence trembled inside her. High Iceris Veilora stood near the entrance in white ceremonial robes, stiff with frozen pearls. Her hair was pale silver, braided beneath a crown of ice needles. Her beauty was sharp in the way winter was beautiful, flawless from a distance, merciless up close. The frozen dragon heart rejects weak blood, Veilora told the gathered court. It does not burn, it does not bleed. It simply remembers who is unworthy of standing near royal power. The nobles watched from behind a wall of enchanted glass above the chamber, safe in their fur mantles and silver masks. They had come to witness punishment without feeling cold. Lady Merel, the favored Frostbride candidate, stood beside the glass stair in a gown of white velvet trimmed with blue fire gems. She smiled down at Elowen with calm cruelty. "How gentle," Merel said. They gave the slave a bed beside a royal relic. A few nobles laughed. Elowen kept her eyes on the floor, not because she accepted the insult, because if she looked up, they might see how badly she wanted to live. Dragon King Kael stood at the chamber door, instead of behind the glass with the court, tall, broad-shouldered, black-haired, wrapped in a black cloak edged with frost. He looked carved from the same dark stone as the palace foundations. His eyes were amber gold, but cold around the edges. A pale mark like frozen flame curved beneath his throat. Elowen had seen him only from a distance before. Kings did not look at slave omegas, but tonight, Kael looked. His gaze moved from her bare feet to the frost circle, then to the frozen dragon heart suspended inside the ice. His expression did not soften, yet something in his jaw tightened, as if the chamber had been arranged too neatly around cruelty. "Why her?" he asked. The room stilled. Veilora bowed slightly. "Because she broke mourning law." Elowen lifted her head despite herself. I dropped a basin. Velora's eyes cut to her. You spilled water across the Queen Mother's memorial flame. It was already out, Elowen whispered. The words left her before fear could stop them. The glass chamber above went silent. Kael's eyes sharpened. Velora smiled faintly. You see, even here, she mistakes disrespect for truth. Elowen lowered her gaze again, but the damage had been done. She had spoken. The old punishment inside the collar woke. Black pain circled her throat, sharp enough to steal breath. But she did not cry out. Kael saw. His hand moved toward the collar. Velora stepped smoothly between them. Your Majesty, do not touch an Omega punishment mark in the heart chamber. The relic may read it as royal pardon, and if I wish to pardon her, a dangerous silence followed. Elowen's heart struck once, hard. Velora's smile thinned. Then the court may ask why a slave who insulted your mother's memory deserves mercy before judgment. Kael went still. The frozen flame mark beneath his throat flickered. Not with heat, with pain. Elowen saw it. So did Velora. The priestess lowered her voice. The frozen dragon heart has guarded your mother's honor since before your birth. Let it judge what living tongues cannot. Kael looked at Elowen. For one breath, she thought he might step forward. Then his face closed. Proceed, he said. The word entered Elowen quietly. That made it worse. She had not expected a king to save her. Still, some small, foolish part of her had hoped the man who noticed the collar's pain would know better than to leave her beneath it. 2 guards pushed her into the frost circle. The cold bit into her bare feet immediately. Elowen staggered but did not fall. She sank to her knees before the ice pillar because her legs would not hold her. The frozen dragon heart loomed above her, silent and enormous, its crystalline chambers locked in blue-white ice. Velora's voice carried through the glass. She will remain here until dawn. If she survives, the heart has judged her harmless. If she dies, the court will know weak blood should not weep near royal grief. The chamber door began to close. Elowen looked up once. Kael was still watching her, not kindly, not cruelly, as if some part of him had begun to hear a sound no one else could. Then the door sealed. The court became shadow behind glass. The cold deepened. At first, Elowen tried not to cry. She had spent years swallowing tears until they became a second language inside her. Tears made punishments worse. Tears gave nobles proof that slave blood was fragile. Tears turned pain into entertainment. But alone beneath the frozen dragon heart, with frost crawling over her fingers and the collar still burning black around her throat, silence finally broke. One tear slid down her cheek. It fell onto the ice. The frozen dragon heart pulsed once. Elowen froze. Above the chamber, the court went still. The blue fire gems along Morel's gown dimmed one by one. Not from cold, from recognition. A second tear fell. Red gold light flickered inside the crystalline heart, like flame behind winter glass. Kael's hand struck the sealed door. The ice did not crack, but the frozen flame mark beneath his throat did. Velora's face went white. Elowen stared as the heart beat again. Slow. Impossible. Alive. Not for the king. Not for royal blood. For her tears. Then, a voice, ancient and sorrowful, moved through the ice chamber. The stolen grief. Fire has found its living vessel. The stolen grief. Fire has found its living vessel. The words moved through the ice chamber slowly, as if the frozen walls themselves had forgotten how to carry sound. Elowen knelt beneath the frozen dragon heart, with tears still cooling on her face, frost crawling over her fingers, and red gold light pulsing inside the crystalline relic above her. The heart beat once more. Slow, deep, alive. The sound struck through the chamber floor and up into the glass gallery where the court stood watching. Nobles who had come to witness a slave Omega freeze now pressed gloved hands against the enchanted glass, their faces pale behind silver masks. Lady Marel Stegel, the blue fire gems stitched along her white velvet gown, had dimmed almost completely. One by one, they lost their cold glow, leaving her less radiant, less untouchable, as if the beauty the court praised had been fed by something that was no longer obeying her. She clutched the largest gem at her chest. "What is happening?" Valora moved before anyone else could answer. "Stand away from the glass." Morel looked at her. "Why are my gems going dark?" The Ice Sirris's face sharpened. "Because the slave's tears are disturbing relic lore." Elowen heard them through the chamber walls, though no voice should have carried so clearly through sealed ice. The heart beat again. The frozen flame mark beneath Kael's throat cracked wider. Blue-white lines split through the pale mark, not bleeding, not burning, but opening like ice under pressure. He braced one hand against the sealed chamber door, jaw locked against pain. "Open it," he said. Valora turned toward him. "Your Majesty." "No." Kael's eyes cut to her. The room above the chamber went still. Valora bowed her head, but not enough. The frozen dragon heart has awakened in the presence of slave blood. Until we know whether it recognizes her or consumes her, the chamber must remain sealed. She is freezing. She was sentenced to judgment. She was sentenced by you. A dangerous silence followed. Elowen looked up through the blur of her tears. Kael stood on the other side of the sealed ice. Black cloak spread over the frost like a shadow. He looked furious now, but not free. His pain held him in place as surely as her collar held her throat. Valora saw that too. "The heart was your mother's safeguard," she said softly. "Do not dishonor Queen Sereth's sacrifice by breaking judgment before it finishes." Kael went still. Elowen felt the name strike the chamber. Sereth, the Queen Mother, the woman whose memorial flame Elowen had supposedly insulted. The frozen dragon heart pulsed harder. Red gold light spread through the ice pillar, and for an instant, Elowen saw something inside it that was not a heart. A woman's hand, pressed from within. Then, gone. Elowen gasped. Kael's head lifted. "What did you see?" Valora's gaze snapped down to Elowen. "She sees nothing. The cold is entering her mind." Elowen should have stayed silent. Silence had kept her alive for years, but the heart above her had beaten for her tears, and the crack in Kael's throat mark was answering it, like a wound finally hearing its own name. "There was a hand inside the ice," she said, voice shaking. The court whispered. Valora's expression hardened. "A slave Omega does not interpret royal relics." "No," Elowen whispered. "She only dies beside them." The words escaped before she could stop them. Kael heard. Something in his face changed. Not softness. Recognition. Valora saw it and moved quickly. The vessel is unstable. Her grief is projecting impurity into the heart. Morel's last blue gem cracked. A thin thread of red gold light slipped from it and stretched downward through the glass toward the frozen dragon heart. Morel cried out and tried to tear the gem free, but it clung to her gown. Elowen stared as the light pulled from Morel's chest toward the heart, as if the relic were calling back something stolen. The ancient voice spoke again. "False frost wears borrowed sorrow." The gallery erupted. Morel looked at Valora with horror. "Borrowed?" Valora's face went still. Too still. Kael turned toward Morel. His voice was low. "What are those gems?" Morel shook her head, suddenly no longer cruel, only frightened. "Bridal frost. Valora said they were cut from the Queen Mother's blessing." The heart beat so hard the ice floor split beneath Elowen's knees. The ancient voice answered, not blessing. Red gold light surged in the ice pillar. Burial. Elowen's collar tightened. Black pain clamped around her throat. She fell forward on one hand, choking, as the Omega Mark tried to silence her even though she had not spoken. Kael slammed his fist against the sealed door. This time, the ice cracked. Only a hairline, but enough for cold air to rush out, and red gold light to spill across his hand. The frozen flame mark at his throat split again. He staggered. Inside the mark, Elowen saw a pulse that matched the heart. Valora stepped in front of him. If you break that door, the vessel may pull the grief fire through you. Kael looked at her. What grief? Fire. Valora's mouth thinned. For the first time, she did not answer quickly enough. Elowen forced herself upright. Her breath came in broken clouds. The frozen dragon heart pulsed above her, and with each beat, she felt grief that did not belong to her. A woman crying without sound. Fire cut from tears before it could become flame. A newborn child taken from arms that still smelled of smoke and milk. Kael, his mother. The heart. The memories came in flashes, too sharp to hold. Elowen pressed both hands to the ice. Your mother did not give this willingly. The chamber went silent. Valora's eyes turned lethal. Kael stared through the cracked door at Elowen. Say that again. Elowen swallowed against the collar's pain. I don't know what they did. But the heart is not guarding her honor. The frozen dragon heart beat again. A woman's voice whispered beneath the Ancient One. No. Kael's face drained of color. Valora moved fast. She lifted one pale hand, and the silver chains hanging from the ice chamber ceiling snapped alive. They shot downward and wrapped around Elowen's wrists, dragging her back from the heart. Kael roared. Valora. She is contaminating the relic with slave grief, Valora said, voice ringing through the gallery. If the vessel continues, she will wake a false bond and fracture the royal line. The nobles panicked. False bond. Slave grief. Fracture. The old words worked quickly. Morel, still gripping her dead gems, looked from Elowen to Kael with terror and something like shame. Elowen struggled against the chains, but the ice bit into her skin. Another tear slid down her face. The frozen dragon heart answered instantly. Beat. The chains around her wrists melted where her tear struck the floor. Valora went white. Kael saw. So did the court. Elowen looked up at the heart, trembling. It did not want her death. It wanted her grief. Not to use it, to remember through it. The ancient voice filled the chamber once more. The vessel is not the danger. The ice pillar cracked from base to crown. The seal is. Valora lifted both hands, and every wall of the chamber turned black with frost. Then let the seal judge her before it breaks. The floor beneath Elowen opened into dark ice. Kael shouted her name. Elowen fell, chains still burning around her wrists, toward a lower chamber, where something red gold beat in the dark like a heart beneath a grave. Elowen fell toward the lower ice chamber, with Valora's chains burning around her wrists. The world above vanished into black frost. For one breath, there was only cold, darkness, and the impossible sound of a heart beating beneath a grave. Then she struck ice. Pain tore through her shoulder. The breath left her body. Frost climbed immediately over her thin slave shift, biting into her skin, while the black Omega collar around her throat tightened as if the court's ownership had followed her even beneath the palace. Elowen forced herself onto one elbow. The lower chamber was smaller than the heart chamber above, but older. No court watched from glass here. No nobles stood warm behind enchantments. The walls were not clear blue ice, but dark frozen stone veined with red gold fire. At the center of the floor, buried beneath layers of black ice, something pulsed. Not the frozen dragon heart. A seal. A vast circular seal carved into the ice. Its runes, shaped like dragon claws, closing around a woman's name. Elowen crawled closer. The name had been scratched, nearly away. Sereth, Kael's mother. The moment Elowen read it, the chamber answered. A memory unfolded around her. Not fully, not kindly. In flashes. A woman with black hair and amber eyes, kneeling before an ice altar. Her hands bound in silver frost. Her face wet with tears. She refused to let fall. A newborn's cry, somewhere beyond the chamber door. Valora, younger but unmistakable, standing beside the frozen dragon heart, with a blade of ice pressed to the woman's chest. "You cannot take grief from a mother," Sereth whispered. Valora's voice answered, calm and merciless. "No, but I can freeze it before it becomes fire." The vision shattered. Elowen gasped. Above her, distant thunder cracked through the ice. Kael. He had broken the sealed door. His voice roared through the chamber above, muffled by layers of frozen stone. "Elowen!" The sound of her name in his voice struck harder than the fall. Not Slave, not Omega. Elowen. She pressed her shaking hands against the seal. "Your mother's grief is here," she whispered, though she did not know if he could hear. They sealed it below the heart. The seal pulsed. Red gold light bled through the black ice and wrapped around her fingers. It should have burned. Instead, it felt warm in the way tears felt warm before the world judged them. Valora's voice drifted down from above. "Do not touch the queen's grief, slave." Elowen looked up. Through the broken ceiling of ice, she could see shadows moving in the upper chamber. Kael had entered. His black cloak swept over the frost. The frozen flame mark beneath his throat blazed through the crack in his collar, split open now in jagged blue-white lines, but silver ice chains wrapped around his arms. Royal ice law. Valora stood before him, both hands raised, her white robes shining with black frost. Behind her, Merel knelt near the glass wall, clutching her ruined blue gems as red gold threads pulled from them toward the frozen dragon heart. Kael strained against the chains. "Release her." Valora's expression was still calm, but her eyes had sharpened with fear. "If the slave opens the lower seal, Queen Sereth's grief, fire will rise uncontrolled. It may destroy your throne, your bond, your bloodline. My mother's grief is not yours to lock away. She begged us to save you." The words hit him. Elowen saw it even from below. "Kael's Rafeltel." Valora stepped closer to him. "You were newborn. Your mother carried a bond too dangerous for the throne. Her grief, fire, would have tied royal power to love, sorrow, and choice. A kingdom cannot be ruled by a heart that breaks whenever the king does." The frozen dragon heart beat once above them. Slow, furious. Elowen felt the pulse in her bones. Valora continued. "We froze what would have weakened you." Kael's voice dropped. "You cut something from her. We preserved you." Elowen's hands tightened over the seal. There it was again. The word every cruel law seemed to love. Preserved, protected, purified. Names that made theft sound holy. The black ice under her palms cracked. Valora's head snapped downward. Elowen lifted her face. "She did not beg you to save him from love." The chamber went silent. Elowen did not know where the certainty came from, only that the grief fire beneath her hands answered it. "She begged you not to make him empty." Kael stared down through the broken ice. For one breath, the king looked young, not weak, wounded in a place no armor had ever covered. Valora's composure finally thinned. "You know nothing of queens." "No," Elowen said, voice shaking. "I know what it means when people call your pain useful." The seal cracked wider. Red gold light rose around her wrists. melting Vealora's chains link by link. The black omega collar at Elowen's throat hissed as warmth touched it. Vealora moved fast. She drove an ice needle into the floor. The lower chamber shook. Black frost surged from the walls and wrapped around the seal, smothering the red-gold light. The frozen dragon heart above faltered, its beat turning thin and uneven. Kael roared and tore one arm free of the royal ice chains. But the moment he reached toward the lower chamber, the frozen flame mark at his throat split deeper. Blood-dark light spilled from it. He staggered, one knee striking the ice. Vealora's voice rang out. The king cannot cross the grief seal. His blood was crowned on its silence. Elowen looked at Kael. He was close enough to see her, too far to reach. The old pain rose inside her. Powerful men seeing suffering, hating it, and still being trapped by systems that had always known how to use them. Vealora looked down at Elowen. Cry again, vessel. If the heart wants your tears, give it enough to drown in. The court above watched in terror. Morel's ruined gems dimmed further. Kael gripped the ice, fighting to stand. Elowen, do not let her make your grief a command. That stopped her. Elowen looked at him. He was asking her not to obey pain, simply because pain had been demanded. The frozen dragon heart beat once. Waiting. The lower seal pulsed beneath her hands. Waiting. Elowen closed her eyes. For years, tears had been the one thing the court could always use against her. They called her weak when she cried, empty when she did not, owned no matter which she chose. But grief was still hers before it was power. She opened her eyes and whispered, If I cry, it will be because I choose to remember. The red gold seal answered. The ice beneath her palm split open, and from inside the frozen name of Queen Serith, a woman's voice whispered, My son was born with a heart. They crowned him without it. My son was born with a heart. They crowned him without it. The woman's voice rose from the broken seal beneath Elowen's hands, soft as a mother whispering through ice, and terrible enough to silence the chamber above. Kael stopped struggling. The royal ice chains still wrapped around one arm and both shoulders, but he no longer seemed to feel them. His face had gone pale beneath the blue-white glow of his cracked throat mark. Every line of power in him, every hard edge the court feared, seemed to turn inward toward that voice. Mother, he said, not loudly, not as a king, as a child who had never been allowed to remember being held. The frozen dragon heart beat again. This time, the pulse shook frost from the ceiling. Red gold light spread through the ice pillar above and ran downward through the walls into the lower chamber, gathering around Elowen's hands. The black omega collar at her throat burned, then loosened by the width of a breath. Vealora saw. Her eyes sharpened. Do not listen to grief given a voice. That is how kingdoms fall. Elowen lifted her head. No, that is how lies do. The words came from somewhere steadier than courage. The lower seal warmed beneath her palms. Queen Serith's half-erased name began to glow in full, letter by letter, as if it had been waiting years for someone willing to cry without surrendering. Vealora stepped to the edge of the broken upper chamber, frost gathering around her fingers. Slave Omega, remove your hands from royal memory. Elowen almost laughed. It came out as breath. Royal memory. As if grief belonged to bloodlines, crowns, seals, priests. As if a mother's sorrow became property once men built enough ice around it. My hands are the only reason it is speaking, she said. Above, Morel trembled near the glass wall. The blue fire gems along her gown had nearly gone dark, each one leaking thin red-gold threads toward the heart. Vealora, she whispered. What did you put in my bridal stones? Vealora did not look at her. Silence. Morel flinched, but she did not fall silent. That was new. Kael's eyes moved to the Frost Bride candidate. He saw the dead gems, the panic, the realization that she too had been dressed in something stolen and called blessed. "Answer her," Kael said. Valora's mouth hardened. "A king's bride must carry winter enough to cool dangerous bonds. Lady Mirelle was prepared to stabilize your reign." "Prepared?" Kael repeated. The word sounded like a blade being drawn slowly. The frozen dragon heart beat harder. Queen Sereth's voice came again through the seal. "They cut my grief. Fire when I cried for you." Kael's throat mark split deeper. Elowen saw the pain strike him, but this time he did not look away. Sereth continued. "They called my tears disorder. They called my bond weakness. They froze what would have taught you to love without command." Valora lifted both hands. "Enough." Black frost exploded from the upper walls and shot downward like spears. Elowen ducked over the seal. Kael tore another chain loose and reached for his sword, but the royal ice law bit into his mark and drove him back to one knee. The frost spears struck the lower seal. Queen Sereth's name flickered. Elowen cried out as pain passed through her palms. It was not a wound exactly. It was memory forced shut too quickly, like a sob swallowed until it became blood. The frozen dragon heart faltered. Valora's voice rang through both chambers. "The slave is not waking truth. She is creating a false maternal bond with forbidden tears. If the court allows this, every grief in the kingdom will claim authority over the throne." The nobles behind the glass stirred. Fear moved among them. It always did when someone gave it noble words. Elowen felt that fear like another layer of ice. A slave Omega crying beneath the palace. A dead queen speaking through a frozen seal. A dragon king on his knees, his mark cracking open for grief instead of command. Vylora knew how it looked. She knew how to turn witness into threat. Kael forced himself upright. "My mother's voice is not treason." Vylora looked at him with something almost like pity. "Your mother's voice made you vulnerable before you were born." "No," Elowen said. The chamber turned toward her. Her body shook from cold, pain, and the weight of every eye above her, but the grief fire beneath her hands did not shake. It pulsed with her tears, with her choice. "No," she said again. "That is what you want him to believe. That, a heart, makes him easy to break." Kael stared down at her. Elowen looked back at him through the broken ice between chambers. "But maybe a king without one is easier to rule." Silence. Then, the frozen dragon heart thundered. The ice pillar cracked down its center. Vylora's face went white with rage. Kael's eyes changed, not softened, not healed, but awake in a place he had kept frozen because he had been taught it was safer numb. The heart spoke again. Not only Sereth now. The ancient voice beneath hers returned, dragon deep and sorrowful. "Tear. Fire does not weaken flame." Red gold light spread from Elowen's palms into the cracks of the lower seal. "It remembers why flame was born." Elowen gasped as warmth rushed through her. She saw Queen Sereth holding a newborn Kael, tears falling onto his sleeping face. Those tears had not hurt him. They had lit tiny red gold sparks beneath his skin. A bonfire between mother and child. Then Vylora and the Ice Seers entered with frozen blades, claiming the bond would make him unstable. They cut the grief fire from Sereth before it could settle into Kael's heart and sealed it beneath the frozen dragon heart. The vision shifted. Mirelle as a child, standing before Vylora while blue fire gems were sewn into her first court gown. Tiny fragments of Sereth's frozen grief fire were locked inside them, not enough to wake the truth, only enough to make Mirelle compatible with Kael's hollow reign. The vision shattered. Mirelle collapsed to her knees above. "I was made to keep him cold," she whispered. Vylora turned on her. "You were made to keep him alive." Kael's voice came low. "You keep saying alive when you mean obedient." The royal ice chains around him cracked. "Not all the way. Enough." Elowen pressed harder into the seal. "Queen Sereth, what do you need?" Vaelora screamed. "Do not ask the dead queen anything." But the question had already entered the ice. The seal answered with a slow red-gold pulse. Sereth's voice filled the lower chamber. Not death, not revenge. The frozen dragon heart beat once. Witness. Elowen understood. The grief fire did not want to burn the palace blindly. It did not want to consume Kael, or Morel, or the court, or even Vaelora's body. It wanted what all buried pain wanted, to be seen without being turned into weakness. Elowen lifted her tear-wet face. "Then witness her." The words struck the glass gallery. A few nobles stepped back. Vaelora smiled coldly. "A slave does not command witness." Kael ripped the last chain from his shoulder. Icelaw tore open the mark at his throat, and he nearly fell, but he stayed standing. "She does not command it," he said. His voice shook the chamber. "I do." The glass wall above the chamber cracked. Kael looked at the court, watching safely from behind it. No more glass. He drove his sword into the ice floor. The enchanted wall shattered. Cold flooded the gallery. The nobles screamed as the chamber's true air reached them at last. Elowen looked up, stunned. For the first time, the court felt what it had sent others to endure. Vaelora turned slowly toward Kael. "You will regret making them share the cold." Kael's eyes burned amber through blue-white fracture. "No," he said. "I regret letting them watch from warmth." The frozen dragon heart pulsed so hard the ice pillar split open. Inside it, red gold fire moved like a living wound. Then the lower seal beneath Elowen's hands opened. Not downward, up. A pillar of grief fire surged around her, warm and bright as tears catching sunrise. Elowen did not burn. The Omega collar at her throat cracked in half. And from within the frozen dragon heart, Queen Sereth's voice whispered, "Now show him what they froze before he could love. Now show him what they froze before he could love." Queen Sereth's voice passed through the frozen dragon heart, and the grief fire around Elowen rose higher. It did not burn her. That was the first impossible thing. The second was that it warmed her without claiming her. For years, every pain in Elowen's life had been turned into someone else's proof. Her tears proved weakness. Her silence proved obedience. Her collar proved ownership. Even now, Vaelora had called her vessel, as if a slave Omega's body was only valuable when it could carry a royal wound. But the red gold fire circling her did not enter like a chain. It waited. Elowen lifted her tear-wet face toward Kael. He stood above her in the broken chamber. Icelaw shattered around his boots. The mark beneath his throat split open, and bleeding blue-white light. Behind him, the court had lost its warm distance. Nobles trembled in the cold they had once watched from safety. Morel knelt among broken blue gems, her perfect bridal gown dim and frost-stained. Vaelora stood apart from them all, still straight, still beautiful, still dangerous. The grief fire touched Kael's broken throat mark. He staggered. The chamber vanished into vision. Elowen saw what he saw, a newborn child wrapped in black dragon silk. Queen Sereth holding him against her chest, weeping silently so no one would hear. Her tears fell onto the infant's skin, and each tear became a tiny red-gold spark. Not sorrow alone, but bonfire warmth, memory, love, grief, fear, devotion, everything a mother's heart could give before the world taught her child to rule without needing anyone. Baby Kael stopped crying. He turned toward the sparks as if he knew them. Then the doors opened. Vaelora entered with the ice seers, frozen blades in white hands. Sereth held the child tighter. No, Vaelora's younger face was calm. Your grief makes him vulnerable. My grief makes him mine. It makes him unstable. It makes him loved. The vision sharpened. A blade of ice touched Sereth's chest. Her tears lifted from her cheeks before they could fall. Red gold sparks tore from the air between mother and child, gathered into a single burning thread, and were pulled screaming toward the frozen dragon heart. Baby Kael cried. Not loudly, not for long, because the second blade touched his tiny throat, and the first frozen flame mark appeared beneath his skin. The vision shattered. Kael dropped to one knee. For a moment, no one moved. Not the court, not Myrel, not even Vaelora. Kael's hand went to his throat, but his eyes were on the heart. I remember nothing. Queen Sereth's voice answered through the fire. That was the cruelty. Elowen felt those words under her ribs. To be hurt was one thing. To be made unable to remember what had been taken was another. Vaelora lifted her chin. A king cannot be ruled by maternal grief. Kael looked at her. You mean a king cannot be difficult to guide. I mean, your mother would have made your heart answer before your crown. Good. The word struck the ice chamber, like a crack through a frozen lake. Vaelora's face changed. Only slightly. Enough. Myrel rose unsteadily, one hand against the broken glass. The blue fire gems along her gown were nearly black now, but red gold threads still pulsed beneath them, trapped inside the seams. And me? She asked. What did you put in me? Vaelora did not look at her. A necessary frost. Myrel laughed once, broken and bitter. You keep calling us necessary when you mean used. The grief fire turned toward her, not angrily, recognizing. Elowen saw another vision flicker around Myrel. A child standing still while ice. Cirrus' hands fastened blue gems along her bodice, telling her she was chosen because she was calm, noble, suitable, cold enough to sit beside a king whose heart must never thaw. Myrel had not been born cruel. She had been decorated into cruelty. The realization did not absolve her, but it made the wound larger than one woman's pride. Vaelora raised both hands. Enough witness. Black frost shot from the walls and wrapped around the grief fire pillar. The warmth around Elowen shuddered. Queen Sereth's name flickered in the lower seal. Kael rose, sword in hand. Vaelora smiled. Strike me, and the grief fire collapses back into the heart. Strike the seal, and your mother's final memory burns through the slave. Elowen saw Kael freeze. Vaelora always built choices that made someone else bleed. The high ice Cirrus turned to the court, voice ringing through the shattered glass chamber. You have seen why Tearfire blood was erased. It does not heal grief. It spreads it. It makes kings kneel to mothers, brides question duty, slaves imagine choice. Some nobles looked away. Some looked frightened. Some looked angry, because the cold had finally reached them. Vaelora saw fear returning, and fed it. If the Omega survives this night, every buried sorrow in Dravenhold will demand witness. Every old bond, every frozen crime, every mother, bride, servant, and traitor who ever wept near royal ice. Elowen forced herself to stand inside the grief fire. Her legs shook, but the broken collar lay at her feet, black and useless. Maybe they should, she said. The chamber went silent. Kael looked at her. Elowen looked at the court. If your peace needs every sorrow buried beneath the palace, then it was never peace. It was storage. The frozen dragon heart beat hard enough to split more ice from its pillar. Vaelora's eyes turned lethal. Then let buried sorrow answer all at once. She drove an ice needle into her own palm. Black frost flooded the lower seal. The chamber walls opened with a sound like breaking bones. Behind the frozen dragon heart, hidden beneath layers of royal ice, dozens of smaller shapes appeared. Sealed tear vessels, each holding a faint red-gold spark. Not all were Sereths. Some were older. Some smaller. Some barely alive. Elowen started. The heart was not the only prison. Valora's voice lowered. Motherless bond. Kael's face went cold. What is that? The ancient voice inside the heart answered before Valora could. The law that cuts love from heirs before love can make them choose. The tear vessels began to crack. Onebe on. Red gold grief fire poured toward Elowen. Too much. Too many mothers. Too many frozen bonds. Kael stepped toward her. Elowen. She lifted one hand, stopping him. Fear shook through her, but beneath it was something stronger now. Choice. If they come through me, she whispered, they come as witness, not as chains. The first vessel broke. Grief fire rushed into the chamber, and every frozen mother in Dravenhold began to cry. The first vessel broke. Grief fire rushed into the chamber, and every frozen mother in Dravenhold began to cry. The sound did not come like sobbing at first. It came like ice cracking too slowly to bear. One vessel split, then another, each releasing a thread of red gold fire wrapped around a woman's broken breath. The lower chamber filled with voices that had never been allowed to finish saying goodbye. Elowen staggered. The grief fire struck her chest, her throat, her palms, her bones. Not one sorrow. Hundreds. Mothers whose children had been taken to be crowned without tenderness. Brides whose bonds had been frozen before they could choose. Servant women whose tears had been collected in ice jars because grief from low blood was easier to steal. Too much. Too many. Valora smiled through the black frost. There. Let witness drown her. Kael moved toward Elowen, but the royal ice law snapped around his throat mark, dragging him back. Blue-white pain split across his skin. He fought it, sword scraping against the frozen floor. But the law knew him. It had been built around his blood before he could speak. Elowen, he said, voice rough. She barely heard him. The motherless bond poured through her like a river of burning tears. Every grief wanted to be seen. Every stolen bond wanted a living mouth. Her knees hit the ice. The broken Omega collar at her feet rattled as if trying to become whole again. Vialora's voice rang above her. This is what forbidden blood does. It turns sorrow into plague. Elowen pressed both hands to the floor. No, she whispered. The grief fire kept coming. Her body shook violently. Frost crawled up her arms while red gold sparks burned beneath her skin. She understood the trap now. Vialora had opened the motherless bond not to free the frozen grief, but to force all of it through Elowen, at once, until the court saw her as a disaster instead of a witness. Oveshel, a danger, a reason to bury Tearfire again. Elowen lifted her head. Tears ran down her face. But for the first time, she did not hate them. I will not carry what you refuse to confess, she said. The grief fire paused. Only a little. Enough. Kael looked at her through the broken chamber, his face locked in pain and awe. Elowen turned her tear-wet eyes toward the watching nobles. These are not mine alone. Silence spread through the shattered gallery. She pointed toward the vessels cracking behind the frozen dragon heart. If your houses gave sons to ice law, if your mothers disappeared after birthing heirs, if your brides were called unstable when they wept, then this grief belongs to your blood too. The nobles recoiled, not from magic, from responsibility. Valora's expression sharpened. Do not listen to her. She is spreading contamination. Merel rose unsteadily from the broken glass. Her white velvet gown hung heavy with dead blue fire gems. Thin red gold threads still glowed inside the seams, pulling toward the motherless bond. She touched one of the gems with trembling fingers. This one, she whispered. Whose grief is this? Vilora's eyes cut to her. Lady Merel, step back. Myrelle did not. The gem cracked under her fingers, and a tiny voice escaped. Not words. Alolepu, Mairelle, went pale. Her gaze moved to the court, to the women in frost jewels, to the mothers who suddenly gripped their throats or wrists as if old pain had begun beating under their skin. I wore this, Morel said. Elowen looked at her. Morel's voice broke. I wore someone's grief and called it elegance. The first thread left her gown. It did not fly to Elowen. It moved toward the cracked vessel behind the heart, then unfolded into the image of a woman kneeling beside an empty cradle. The court gasped. Elowen understood. The grief did not need one body to hold it. It needed the correct witnesses to return it. Name it, Elowen said. Morel looked terrified. I do not know her name. The woman's image flickered. Vaelora smiled coldly. Then it remains mine to seal. Kael roared and tore, one step free of the royal ice law. Blood-dark frost ran down his throat from the cracked mark, but he stayed upright. No grief in this chamber belongs to you, he said. The frozen dragon heart thundered. A new crack split through the ice pillar, and Queen Sereth's voice rose again. Ask the ice what it stole. Elowen placed one hand on the floor. This time, she did not pull the grief into herself. She asked. The ice beneath Morel's broken gem glowed red gold. A name appeared in frost. Aveline. The woman's image lifted her head. Morel whispered the name. Aveline. The grief fire thread brightened, then broke free from her gown completely. It returned to the vessel, not as a prisoner, but as memory restored. The woman's image closed her eyes, and the chamber warmed by one breath. The court saw it. Elowen looked at them. That is witness. Another noble woman sobbed suddenly and tore a frost bracelet from her wrist. Mine is burning. Elowen's voice shook. Ask its name. The woman fell to her knees. What did they take? The ice answered. Name by name, the motherless bond began to change. Not all grief rushed through Elowen now. Some turned toward the houses that had worn it. Some moved toward old seals. Some entered the frozen dragon heart and came back as images, voices, unfinished farewells. Vaelora's control slipped. Black frost exploded from her hands, wrapping around the vessels, trying to force them shut. Kael stepped forward again. The royal ice lord tightened, but this time he did not fight it with strength. He placed one hand over the cracked mark at his throat and looked at the court. I was crowned on silence, he said. I revoke that crown's right to keep it. The chamber shook. Vaelora's face went white. You cannot revoke royal ice law. It predates you. Kael's eyes burned amber through the blue-white fractures. Then it ends with me. He drove his sword into the frozen floor. The mark at his throat split fully open, not as a wound, as a door. Red gold grief fire surged from the motherless bond toward him. For one terrible heartbeat, Elowen thought it would destroy him. But Kael did not take it into his body. He let it pass through the broken authority of his crown, out into the chamber, where every noble could see the names ice law had buried. Vaelora screamed. Stop. Elowen rose slowly, tears still falling, no longer alone beneath them. She faced the frozen dragon heart. The living vessel is not one body, she whispered. The heart beat. The living vessel is witness. The ice pillar cracked from top to base. Inside, the massive crystalline dragon heart pulsed red gold, brighter than ever. But behind it another shape appeared, a woman's silhouette, bound in frozen flame, one hand pressed against the inside of the ice. Queen Sereth. Kael stopped breathing. Elowen looked up at her. Sereth's voice filled the chamber. My grief was not stolen to save my son. The red gold light turned toward Vaelora. It was stolen to keep him from choosing love over law. My grief was not stolen to save my son. Queen Sereth's voice filled the shattered ice chamber, soft enough to sound like mourning, and strong enough to make every frozen wall tremble. It was stolen to keep him from choosing love over law. The words struck Kael harder than any blade. He stood with his sword buried in the frozen floor. The mark beneath his throat split open like a door of red-gold fire and blue-white ice. The motherless bond moved through that opening now, not into his body as a wound, but through the broken authority of his crown, showing the court what had been hidden beneath Dravenhold's perfect cold. Elowen watched him absorb the truth, not the magic, the meaning. He had been raised to believe his restraint was strength, his coldness was discipline, his distance from grief, love, tenderness, and mercy was royal necessity. But beneath the palace, in the heart of the ice, his own mother's stolen sorrow had just named that necessity a theft. Vailora's face hardened. "The dead queen speaks through corrupted grief," she said. "A mother's love is not law." Queen Sereth's silhouette shifted inside the frozen dragon heart, one hand still pressed against the ice from within. "No," Sereth said, "but law without love becomes a knife that never stops cutting." The court behind the shattered glass did not speak. They were too cold now, too exposed, too close to the pain they had spent years watching from safety. Morel stood among them with her dead blue gems hanging like small dark wounds across her gown. One gem still pulsed faintly near her collarbone. She touched it with trembling fingers, then looked at Elowen. "There is one more." Valora's eyes flashed. "Do not." Morel flinched, but she did not lower her hand. The old version of her would have obeyed quickly, beautifully, with fear hidden beneath pride. This Morel looked terrified, but terror had stopped being enough to make her still. "Whose grief is it?" she asked. Elowen placed one palm against the ice floor. She did not pull the grief toward herself. She asked the chamber to answer. Red gold light spread beneath Morel's feet. Frost formed letters beside the broken gem. "Sereth." The court gasped. Kael turned sharply. Mairelle went white. "No." The gem at her collarbone cracked open. A thread of red gold fire emerged, brighter and deeper than the others. It did not move toward a vessel on the wall. It moved toward the frozen dragon heart, toward Sereth's bound silhouette. Morel covered her mouth with one shaking hand. "I wore your mother's grief." Kael's face tightened, but he did not look at her with hatred. That seemed to hurt her more. Vailora stepped forward, black frost gathering around her robes. Lady Morel was prepared as a frost bride. A king with thawing grief requires a bride capable of cooling him. Queen Sereth's fire was divided because a mother's bond is strongest when broken correctly. Elowen's stomach turned. "Correctly," she whispered. Vailora looked down at her. "Do not pretend horror. You are alive because order exists. Without it, slave blood freezes first." Kael lifted his head. "No." The word shook the chamber. Vailora's gaze moved to him. Kael pulled his sword from the floor. Red gold grief fire and blue-white ice streamed along the blade. "She is alive because she endured what my court called order." The frozen dragon heart beat once. Vailora smiled coldly. "Then choose, your majesty." The chamber stilled. The ice cirrus raised both hands, and the black frost around the lower seal formed two paths. One wrapped around the frozen dragon heart, the other wrapped around Elowen. "If you restore Queen Sereth's grief, fire," Vailora said, "the bond your mother left inside you will awaken. You will no longer rule untouched. Every sorrow in this kingdom will reach you. Every betrayal will wound you. Every death under your command will burn." The frost around Elowen tightened, but if you seal the vessel, the heart sleeps again. Your reign survives. The court remains stable. The slave dies cleanly, and history stays frozen. Elowen stopped breathing. There it was, the perfect royal choice. One life against a kingdom, one slave against law. One woman's grief against a throne built to outlive women. Kael looked at Elowen. She braced herself for the old pause, for the calculation, for the hesitation, Every powerful man seemed to learn before choosing whether a powerless girl was worth the cost. His face did not soften, but his answer came at once. I reject the choice. Velora's eyes narrowed. You cannot. I can. You built it from a lie. The frost paths shuddered. Kael stepped toward Elowen, but stopped before crossing into the seal. Elowen Vale is not the price of my heart. The grief fire around her warmed, and my mother is not the danger my throne must survive. Queen Sereth's silhouette brightened behind the ice. Velora's calm cracked. Then, you will let grief rule you. Kael's voice dropped. No, I will let it reach me. The frozen dragon heart thundered. Elowen felt the words move through her like sunlight beneath ice. Not rescue. Recognition. She rose slowly, frost falling from her torn slave shift, tears still wet on her cheeks. The broken collar lay behind her, in two black halves. Then let it reach more than you, she said. Kael looked at her. Elowen turned to the court. If the living vessel is witness, then no one gets to watch from above and call one body enough. The nobles recoiled. Morel understood first. She tore the final cracked gem from her gown. Blood touched her fingers as the jewel came free. She stepped to the broken edge of the gallery and threw it down into the lower chamber. The red gold thread inside it flew to Queen Sereth's frozen hand. I return what I wore, Morel said, voice breaking. And I witness what was done. The chamber answered. The grief fire did not strike Elowen. It spread outward. A noblewoman near the shattered glass began to sob as the frost necklace at her throat glowed red gold. An old lord tore a blue gem from his ring and saw a woman's name burn beneath it. A court matron removed her ice earrings and found tiny sparks of someone else's tears trapped inside the stones. One by one, the stolen sorrows stopped, pouring into Elowen alone. They found their witnesses. Velora screamed. She drove both hands into the lower seal, and black frost shot toward Queen Sereth's silhouette inside the heart. If grief will not obey, she said, then grief will be erased. Kael moved. Elowen moved faster. She stepped into the frost between Velora and the heart, not as a shield to be used, but as the first witness who refused to look away. The black frost struck her palms. Pain tore through her. Kael shouted her name. Elowen held on. Tears streamed down her face, each one turning red gold before it fell. I witness Queen Sereth, she said. Morel's voice joined from above. I witness Queen Sereth. And then another voice, then another. The court, frightened and shaking, began to repeat the name. Queen Sereth, Queen Sereth, Queen Sereth. The frozen dragon heart cracked open. Velora's black frost shuddered, and from inside the ice, the dead queen opened her eyes. The dead queen opened her eyes. The entire ice chamber stopped breathing. Queen Sereth stood inside the cracked, frozen dragon heart. Not flesh, not ghost exactly, but something older than both. A memory made of grief, fire, motherhood, and royal betrayal. Her hair floated around her like black silk beneath frozen water. Red gold light burned beneath her translucent skin. One hand remained pressed against the inside of the ice, and where her palm touched, the frozen wall melted into tears. Kael stood below her, sword lowered. For the first time since Elowen had seen him, the Dragon King looked unable to command anything. Mother, he whispered. Sereth's eyes moved to him. The grief in them was not weak. It was enormous. My son, she said. The frozen dragon heart beat. Not above Elowen now. Around them, every wall answered. Every ice chain trembled. Every stolen tear gem worn by the court flickered red gold. The nobles above the shattered glass gallery had begun repeating Sereth's name, but the sound faded into stunned silence as the queen's gaze passed over them. Vaelora staggered back from the broken seal. Black frost still clung to her fingers, but it looked thinner now, less like power and more like something afraid of warmth. "This is not Queen Sereth," she said sharply. "This is grief wearing her face." Sereth turned her eyes to the ice cirrus. Vaelora did not flinch, but the ice beneath her feet cracked. "You always feared grief most when it remembered your name," the queen said. The court murmured. Elowen stood between them, palms still burning from where she had blocked Vaelora's frost. Her knees shook. Her torn slave shift hung stiff with melting ice. Tears still moved down her face, but each one now glowed faintly before it touched the floor. The dead queen looked at her. "Tear, fire, child," Elowen swallowed. "I am not a child of queens." "No," Sereth said gently. "You are a child of women they made useful by making them suffer." The words pierced too cleanly. Elowen almost lowered her eyes from old habit, but the broken halves of her omega collar lay at her feet. She did not. Sereth lifted her hand from the ice. The frozen dragon heart cracked wider, exposing its red-gold chambers. Inside those chambers were not only flames, but memories. Mothers holding infants, brides crying before forced bonds, slave women washing blood from royal floors, queens swallowing screams so their sons would not be called unstable. All of them had fed the heart. All of them had been called weakness. Vaelora raised her voice to the court. "Look carefully. This is what happens when grief is given authority. It multiplies. It enters slaves, brides, queens, kings. It makes every sorrow a crown." Elowen felt the court's fear stir again. Vaelora was wounded, but not defeated. Her weapon had always been the same. Take pain, give it a terrifying name, and make everyone beg for the cage. Kael stepped forward. The frozen flame mark at his throat was split fully open now. Red-gold light pulsed beneath blue-white cracks, as if his mother's bond had found the door Vaelora built over it. "You stole my mother's grief." "Fire," he said. Vaelora faced him. "I removed the one force that would have made you unfit to rule. My heart, your dependency." Sereth's expression changed. Not rage. Worse. Pity. "You were there when he cried for me," she said. "A newborn asking only to be held." Vaelora's mouth tightened. "A king cannot be raised by hunger. A child can." Kael closed his eyes. The chamber seemed to fold around the wound those words opened. Elowen saw it then. Not only the king, not only the dragon, but the infant who had been taught before memory that longing was dangerous. No wonder Kael's mercy came late. No wonder his first instinct had been to hesitate before Elowen's punishment. He had been crowned, without the part that reached. That did not excuse him, but it explained the shape of his coldness. Morel stepped to the broken edge of the gallery. White gown dim, gems dead, hands stained with frost blood. "I wore Sereth's grief," she said to the court. "I wore it and called myself worthy." Vaelora snapped. "You were chosen." Morel shook her head. "I was prepared." The word made several noble women look down at their own jewels. One by one, more red gold sparks appeared in frozen necklaces, rings, combs, and bridle pins. The court was not watching a single crime anymore. It was watching an entire system begin to thaw. Vaelora saw it. Her face hardened into decision. "If Queen Sereth wakes fully," she said, "then every royal bond frozen under ice law will awaken with her. Dead mothers, failed brides, unchosen heirs, slave tears. You think this is justice? It will drown Dravenhold in claims." Sereth answered softly. Only the false ones fear being answered. Vaelora drove her ice needle into the floor again. This time, she did not aim at Elowen. She aimed at Kael. Black frost shot up around the Dragon King and wrapped his throat mark. Kael staggered as the split mark burned blue-white, then red-gold, then black at the edges. "The king chooses now," Valora said. "Seal his mother and remain sovereign, or open the bond and let every grief in the kingdom reach his throne." Kael's hand went to his throat. The court waited. Elowen waited too, though she hated herself for it. She had seen him choose better tonight. She had seen him break glass, reject her sacrifice, name witness. But this was not only one slave Omega. This was his mother, his throne, his entire reign, his cold crown, and every sorrow waiting outside the walls. Kael looked at the frozen dragon heart. Then at Elowen, not because she was the answer, because she had become the first person who did not let him hide from the question. "What does a heart cost?" he asked her. The chamber went silent. Elowen's breath trembled. No one had ever asked her the price of feeling. They had only punished her for showing it. She looked at the broken collar on the floor, then at the mother's vessels, then at Queen Sereth's burning eyes. "Everything people built to avoid having one," she said. Kael absorbed that. Then he nodded once, then let it cost. Vailora's face went white. Kael lifted both hands to the frozen flame mark at his throat and tore the ice law open. The chamber erupted. Red gold grief fire surged from the frozen dragon heart into the broken mark. But this time Kael did not command it. He let it enter. He let it hurt. He let every buried bond strike him. His mother's stolen tears, the slave women's frozen sorrow, Mirel's stolen bridal grief, the mothers whose names had been sealed in ice. He fell to one knee, not defeated, feeling. The court watched their king weep for the first time. One tear slid down Kael'Ver's face and struck the ice. The frozen dragon heart beat so hard, the palace above shook. Valora screamed. "Weakness!" Kael lifted his head, eyes burning red gold through tears. "No," he said. His voice shook the ice chamber. "Return." The grief fire obeyed, not as a servant, as something finally invited home. Queen Sereth's frozen prison, split from crown to root. The heart opened, and behind the dead queen, hundreds of frozen bond threads began to glow. Behind the dead queen, hundreds of frozen bond threads began to glow. They stretched through the opened frozen dragon heart, like veins of red gold light trapped inside blue-white ice, thin as hair, bright as wounds. Some led upward toward the palace, some vanished into the walls, some curled around old rings, bridal gems, cradle charms, slave collars, mourning chains, and court seals. Every thread pulsed with grief that had been cut, named unstable, sealed away, and used to keep Dravenhold cold enough to obey. Elowen stared at them and understood. The heart had never held only Queen Sereth. It held every bond royal ice had stolen. Kael remained on one knee beneath the opened heart, one tear still bright on the ice before him. The frozen flame mark at his throat was no longer a pale scar. It had become a living wound of red gold fire and blue-white frost. Not healed, not hidden, but honest. Queen Sereth's memory stood inside the heart's broken shell, looking at him with grief and pride. "My son," she said softly, "do not carry them alone." Vailora laughed. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the wonder in the chamber. "Listen to her." The ice, Cirrus said, spreading her arms as black frost gathered beneath every glowing thread. "Even now, the dead queen knows one heart cannot bear a kingdom's sorrow. Open all bonds, and your court will drown in claims. Mothers will demand sons. Brides will demand choices. Slaves will demand names. Every frozen grief will ask who profited from its silence." Her eyes moved to the nobles above, "And it will ask you." Fear rippled through the shattered gallery. Elowen felt it move across the court like cold wind. Not all of them were guilty in the same way. Some had worn stolen sorrow knowingly. Some had inherited jewels without asking whose tears lit them. Some had watched punishment from warmth and called ignorance innocence. But all of them feared what witness might require. Valora saw that fear. She drove her ice needle into the broken floor. Let the court see what happens when grief is freed without law. Black frost struck the bond threads. The chamber screamed, not with one voice, with hundreds. Images burst through the air. A mother clawing at a sealed nursery door. A young bride kneeling before an ice altar while her tears were gathered into blue gems. A slave woman chained beneath a palace stair, her grief collected, because no one would ask where low-born sorrow went. A dragon queen pressing a newborn to her chest before ice seers entered with blades. The visions came too fast, too many. Nobles fell to their knees, covering their ears. Morel staggered against the broken glass, sobbing as the last dead gems on her gown showed the women whose pain had made her worthy. Kael bowed under the weight of it, teeth clenched, his true heart newly opened and already being flooded. Valora smiled. There, grief without order becomes madness. Elowen nearly collapsed as the bond thread surged toward her again. The old trap returned. Make her the vessel. Make her the danger. Make her body the place where every hidden sorrow could be blamed. She tasted blood where she had bitten her lip. Tears slid down her face, but they no longer fell helplessly. They glowed red gold, each one striking the ice like a tiny bell. No, she whispered. The bond threads paused. Elowen lifted her head. No, she said again louder. I will not be the chamber where all of you hide what you did. Valora's eyes narrowed. Elowen turned to the court above, shaking, barefoot, collar broken, slave shift torn, grief fire shining around her like sunrise caught in tears. If a thread leads to your house, touch it, she said. If a jewel burns, name it. If a seal glows, open it. If your comfort came from someone else's frozen bond, witness it. No one moved. Then Mère le dit. She stepped away from the shattered gallery and descended the ice stair into the chamber below. Her white gown dragged through frost. Her hands trembled, but she reached for the red gold thread still caught in the torn seam at her waist. Valora snapped. Lady Morel, do not humiliate yourself further. Morel looked at her with wet eyes. You did that when you dressed me in grief and called it destiny. She took the thread in both hands. It burned her palms. She did not let go. Aveline, she whispered, naming the grief she had already returned. Another thread brightened. Morel looked toward Elowen. Ask. Elowen touched the ice. A second name appeared in frost. Serith. Morel flinched, then bowed her head. Queen Serith, I witness what I wore. The thread left her gown and flew into the opened heart. Queen Serith closed her eyes, as if a missing breath had returned. One noblewoman near the glass sobbed and tore a blue bracelet from her wrist. Ask mine. Another lord removed an ice ring with shaking fingers. Mine. A court matron unclasped her frost necklace. Mine too. Names began appearing across the chamber floor. Not all at once. Onebewan, Leora, Esmene, Ruth, Morena, Celia. Each name pulled grief away from Elowen and toward its rightful witness. The chamber warmed by degrees. The bond thread stopped thrashing and began untangling. Kael rose slowly. His face was wet. The court saw. No one dared call it weakness now. He looked at the nobles, then at Valora. This is what you feared. Valora's face was pale with fury. I feared collapse. No, Kael said. You feared return. The frozen dragon heart beat again, stronger. Valora's black frost retreated from the threads, then gathered around her body like armor. If the court chooses witness, then royal ice law will choose survival. The ice beneath the chamber split open. From below rose the oldest seal yet, a circular law, mark carved with dragon crowns, bride knots, slave collars, and motherless cradles, all bound around a single frozen word. Obedience. Queen Sereth's light flickered. Kael's mark flared in pain. Elowen felt every bond thread recoil. Valora lifted both hands. The first ice law predates queen, king, bride, and slave. It permits the throne to freeze any bond that threatens royal continuity. Kael stepped forward. I am the throne. Valora smiled. No, your majesty. You are its heir. The obedience seal opened like an eye. Black ice shot toward the frozen dragon heart. Queen Sereth, Kael, Merel, and every witness who had touched a thread. Elowen moved to block it. Kael caught her wrist, not to restrain her, but to stop her from standing alone. No, he said, voice rough. Not this time. He turned to the court. Witness with her. For a terrible second. No one moved. Then Merel stepped beside Elowen. Then the noble woman with the bracelet. Then the old lord with the ring. Then one servant from the gallery, weeping silently, held up a broken frost charm from her own collar. More followed. Not enough to cleanse a kingdom. Enough to begin. Kael faced the obedient seal and lifted his sword. I revoke the first ice law's right over living bonds. Valora screamed. You cannot revoke what made your crown. Kael looked at Elowen, then at his mother, then at the court finally shaking under the weight of what it had preserved. Then I unmake the crown that needed it. He drove his sword into the obedient seal. Elowen placed her tear-wet hand on the blade. Merel placed hers beside it. One by one, witnesses reached for the glowing threads. The seal cracked. Black ice exploded upward. And beneath the shattered law, something ancient began to breathe. Beneath the shattered law, something ancient began to breathe. The sound moved through the ice chamber, like the first inhale after centuries of drowning. Not human, not fully dragon, deeper than both. The frozen dragon heart pulsed above them, cracked open around Queen Sereth's burning silhouette, while the obedient seal split across the floor beneath Kael's sword, Elowen's tear-wet hand, Merel's trembling palm, and every witness who had finally touched a thread. Black ice fell away. Under it lay a dragon, not flesh, memory. A vast shape made of red-gold grief fire and blue-white frost, curled beneath the palace like a sleeping wound. Its wings had been pinned under law marks. Its throat had been chained with bride knots, crown seals, slave collars, and motherless cradle runes. One enormous eye opened beneath the broken ice. The chamber went silent. Valora staggered back. For the first time, true fear touched her face. Queen Sereth's voice trembled through the heart. The first dragon bond. Kael's grip tightened on his sword. What is it? The ancient dragon memory lifted its head slightly, and every bond thread in the chamber brightened in answer. Elowen felt the truth before it spoke. The frozen dragon heart had not belonged only to one queen. It had been built around the oldest bond in Dravenhold, the bond between dragonfire and grief, between power and the heart that gave it meaning. Royal ice law had not preserved the kingdom by freezing dangerous emotion. It had frozen the source of true dragon strength. The ancient voice rose from beneath them. Fire without grief becomes conquest. The ice walls shuddered. Grief without witness becomes prison. Valora lifted both hands, black frost gathering around her like armor. No, that thing is the reason the old queens ruined kings. That bond made rulers hesitate. It made them mourn enemies. It made them spare traitors. It made them choose people over continuity. Elowen looked at her, understanding at last. Valora had not preserved coldness because she loved cruelty for its own sake. She feared a kingdom that could be wounded by the people it ruled. She had made obedience holy, because choice was too unpredictable, too human, too alive. Kael stepped forward. You froze the heart of my line because you feared mercy. Vaelora's eyes burned. I froze it because mercy kills crowns. No, Elowen said quietly. It kills cages. The first dragon bond breathed again. Warmth spread across the chamber. Not gentle warmth. Honest warmth. The kind that made frozen wounds ache before they healed. Nobles cried out as the bond threads they held began showing them what their houses had worn, hidden, signed, and silenced. A noblewoman saw her mother weeping behind a sealed birthing screen. An old lord saw the bride he had been told was unstable, her tears locked in his family ring. A servant saw 3 generations of Omega women punished for crying near royal ice because their grief had been harvested into palace charms. The court did not collapse. It finally saw. Vaelora screamed and thrust both hands toward the frozen dragon heart. Seal them! The chamber answered her command out of old habit. Black frost surged toward the heart, toward Sereth, toward the first dragon bond, toward Elowen. Kael moved, but Elowen stepped with him. This time, neither stood in front of the other. They stood side by side. Morel joined them, face wet, hands bleeding from the cracked grief gems she had torn from her gown. One by one, the witnesses stepped closer. Noble, servant, bride, guard, mother, lord. Not all brave, not all innocent, but present. Elowen lifted her hand. Tears still fell from her face, red gold before they touched the ice. I witnessed Queen Sereth, she said. Kael's voice followed. I witnessed the heart stolen from my mother. Morel swallowed. I witnessed the grief I wore and called worth. The servant with the broken frost charm whispered. I witnessed the tears taken from slave blood. More voices joined. Some strong, some barely audible, but enough. The black frost struck them and broke. Vaelora stumbled as if the impact had reached her bones. The crown of ice needles in her hair cracked. One needle fell, then another, shattering against the floor. You do not understand what you are freeing, she said. Queen Sereth stepped through the broken surface of the frozen dragon heart. Not fully alive, not fully dead. Her body was grief fire, shaped by memory, her face luminous with sorrow and love. She moved toward Vaelora, and the ice seeress did not retreat until Sereth stood close enough to touch her. I know what you feared, Sereth said. Vaelora's mouth tightened. Sereth's voice was quiet. But fear does not become wisdom because it survives long enough to write law. The words struck harder than rage. Vaelora's black frost flickered. The first dragon bond lifted its chained wings. The broken law marks fell from them one by one, dissolving into rain-warm light. The frozen dragon heart beat again. Not for Elowen alone now, not even for Kael alone, but for every bond that had chosen witness over silence. Then the heart turned toward Elowen. The ancient voice filled the chamber. Tear, fire air. Elowen trembled. After a lifetime of being called slave, Omega, weak blood, punishment, vessel, the name should have felt like a crown. Instead, it felt like a door she could choose whether to walk through. You woke the heart, the voice said. Elowen looked at the broken collar at her feet. I cried beside it. You chose to remember. The chamber warmed. The black mark on her collar dissolved into water and ash. No one owned her now. Vaelora saw it and made one final move. She seized a shard from her broken ice crown and drove it toward her own palm. If royal ice falls, I will bind the last seal with my blood. Kael's sword lifted, but Merrily moved first. She caught Vaelora's wrist. The court gasped. Morel's face was pale, but her grip did not shake. "No more women bleeding to keep your law alive." Vaelora stared at her former chosen bride with disbelief. "I made you worthy." Morel's eyes filled. "You made me cold." She twisted the shard from Vaelora's hand and let it fall. The first dragon bond exhaled. The ice crown shattered completely. Vaelora fell to her knees as every hidden seal she had carried under her skin appeared in black frost. Motherless bond, bride frost, slave judgment, royal ice law, grief containment, omega punishment, blood, silence. The chamber saw them all. Kael looked down at her. "High ice. Cirrus Vaelora will stand before Dragon Witness. Every frozen bond, every tear, vessel, every bride gem, every slave punishment sealed under her order will be opened." Vaelora lifted her head, eyes hollow with fury. "You will drown in grief." Kael's face was wet with tears he no longer hid. "Then I will learn to rule without pretending I am made of ice." Queen Sereth turned to him. The grief fire in the frozen dragon heart flowed toward the cracked mark at his throat. Kael did not command it. He opened his hands and let it come. Red gold light entered him slowly, not as a weapon, not as a crown, but as a memory returning to the place it had been denied. He staggered. Elowen reached for him, then stopped. He looked at her, and the faintest broken smile touched his mouth. "You may," he said. The permission was not royal. It was human. Elowen took his arm. The grief fire settled inside him. His frozen flame mark did not vanish. It changed. Ice and fire remained together, a scar and a flame, proof of what had been done and what had been restored. Queen Sereth's form began to fade. Kael's hand tightened once around Elowen's. "Mother," Sereth smiled through the light. "Now you can feel me leaving." Pain crossed his face, but he did not look away. "Yes," he whispered. "Good," she said. "A heart should know when it breaks. That is how it knows what to protect." Then she dissolved into the frozen dragon heart. The heart beat once, twice, then softened from crystalline prison into living red gold light, suspended in clear ice that no longer looked like a cage. The first dragon bond lowered its vast head to Elowen, not kneeling, recognizing. At dawn, the court returned above ground, changed and trembling. The glass gallery was broken. The ice chamber stood open. The frozen dragon heart remained beneath the palace, but no longer as punishment. Kael ordered every omega collar marked by ice law destroyed, every frozen bond reviewed, every tear vessel named, and every bride chosen through stolen grief released from oath. When the guards came to remove Vaelora, no one called it revenge. They called it witness. Morel stood beside the broken stair, stripped of gems, no longer shining with stolen sorrow. She looked at Elowen with shame. "I laughed when they sent you below." "Yes," Elowen said. Morel accepted the wound. "I will help open the bride records. You will start with the names inside your gown." Morel bowed her head. "Yes." Then Kael turned to Elowen. The court watched carefully, waiting for the shape it understood. Dragon King restored, slave Omega revealed, true bond awakened, woman claimed as reward for suffering. Kael did not give them that story. He stopped before her, with space between them. "Elowen Vale," he said, voice low. "My mother's heart beat for your tears, before it beat for my crown." Elowen's throat tightened. He looked at the broken collar pieces being carried away by guards. "You were sent below because I let Vaelora call cruelty judgment." "Yes," she said. He did not flinch. "I cannot undo the night you spent on that ice. No, I cannot make my hesitation harmless. No." His eyes held hers. Amber gold now, warmed by red gold grief fire. "Then let me begin with what is yours. Your name restored. Your collar destroyed. your bloodline recorded, your grief never again used without consent. The word consent moved through the court like something unfamiliar and dangerous. Elowen looked at him for a long moment. This was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first answer that did not turn her pain into a throne's tool. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Kael's voice softened. "Nothing I do not ask for, and you do not choose." The frozen dragon heart beat once beneath the palace. Elowen heard it. So did he. A bond had awakened there. Not simple, not gentle, not clean enough to be called fate without consequence. It was made of tears, stolen grief, restored memory, and a king learning that love was not weakness simply because it could wound him. Elowen held out her hand. Kael did not seize it. He waited until her fingers touched his. Above them, the first sunlight entered the ice chamber. It passed through broken glass, clear ice, and red-gold heartlight, turning the floor beneath their feet warm. For the first time in her life, Elowen cried where the court could see. No one laughed. No collar tightened. No priestess named it weakness. Far below the throne, the frozen dragon heart beat again. Not only for her tears now, for every grief that had finally been allowed to live.